The marble hallway glowed under dim pendant lights, casting long shadows across the silent mansion. It was past midnight. Lucas Grant stood frozen outside his son's bedroom door, still wearing his tailored suit from another late meeting, his hand hovering over the brass handle. From inside came a sound he hadn't heard in months. Soft, muffled sobbing. Small. Fragile. Like someone crying into a pillow, terrified of being heard. Evan. His 10-year-old son, the boy he thought had moved on, after the divorce, after everything fell apart. Lucas's chest tightened. He reached for the door, ready to push it open, but something stopped him. Through the narrow gap he saw her. Lila Moore, 13 years old, the maid's daughter. Sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Evan's bed, whispering something so gentle that his son's sobs began to quiet. Lucas stood there, breath caught, watching this girl he barely knew do what he couldn't. Heal his son. If you were him, would you step inside or stand in silence, about to witness what would change everything? Lucas Grant didn't become a billionaire by being soft. He built his tech empire through calculated decisions, 16-hour workdays, and an ability to compartmentalize emotion. When his marriage to Victoria collapsed 6 months ago, he'd handled it like a merger gone wrong. Sign the papers, split the assets, move forward. But divorce isn't a business deal when a child is involved. Evan had watched his mother pack her bags, watched her choose her new life in Paris over staying, watched his father bury himself deeper into work as if nothing had shattered. The boy who once filled the mansion with laughter became a ghost, wandering its halls, silent and small. Lucas told himself Evan was resilient. Kids bounce back. He's strong. He was wrong. Grace Moore had worked for the Grant family for 5 years. She was efficient, discreet, and asked for little. When her own husband passed away last year, leaving her alone with her teenage daughter, Lucas had offered her the staff quarters on the mansion's east wing. It was practical. She could work longer hours. The arrangement benefited everyone. Grace brought Lila with her. Lila Moore was everything her mother was, but softer around the edges. At 13, she moved through the mansion like a careful shadow, always with a book tucked under her arm, always observing. She had her mother's dark hair and quiet strength, but her eyes held something different. Empathy. The kind that sees what others miss. She noticed things. Like how Evan never ate breakfast anymore. How he kept his mother's perfume bottle hidden in his desk drawer. How he'd torn up an old happy birthday card from her, then spent an hour staring at the pieces scattered across his floor. One afternoon, while Grace vacuumed the study, Lila knelt beside Evan's wastebasket and carefully picked up every fragment of that card. 23 pieces. She placed them in a small wooden box she kept on her windowsill. She didn't know why. She just knew they mattered. Lucas rarely saw any of this. He left before sunrise, returned after dinner, reviewed reports in his office until midnight. He'd pass Evan's room, hear nothing, assume silence meant peace. He never stopped to listen closer. The mansion became a place where 4 people lived, but no one truly connected. Lucas in his office. Evan in his loneliness. Grace in her duties. And Lila, the quiet observer, watching a family fall apart in slow motion. Until that night. Lucas had come home earlier than usual. A meeting canceled. Rare. He'd climbed the stairs, loosening his tie when he heard it. That small, broken sound. Crying. He froze outside Evan's door. His hand touched the handle, ready to enter, ready to finally be the father he should have been all along. But through the cracked door, he saw movement. Lila sat on the floor beside Evan's bed, her back against the wall, her voice barely a whisper. Evan was curled under his covers, face buried in his pillow, shoulders shaking. "It's okay to miss her," Lila said softly. "Missing someone doesn't make you weak." Evan's crying slowed. "Dad doesn't miss her. He doesn't miss anything." Lucas's heart stopped. "Maybe," Lila whispered, "grown-ups cry too. They just hide it better." Lucas stood in that hallway, his hand still on the door, unable to move. This girl, this child he'd barely acknowledged, was reaching his son in ways he'd forgotten how to. And for the first time in 6 months, Lucas Grant felt something crack inside his chest. Not anger, not frustration, shame. Lucas didn't enter the room that night. He stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, listening. Every word between those two children felt like a knife twisting deeper into his conscience. "Does your dad even know you're sad?" Lila asked gently. Evan's voice cracked. "He doesn't care. About me. About Mom leaving. About anything except his stupid company." "I don't think that's true." "Then why doesn't he ever ask? Why doesn't he ever just sit with me?" Lila was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that made Lucas close his eyes. "Maybe he doesn't know how. Maybe he's scared too. Scared of what? Of not being enough." Lucas turned and walked away before he could hear more. He couldn't face his son. Not yet. Not when everything the boy said was true. The next morning, Lucas woke to find Evan already at the breakfast table pushing cereal around his bowl. Grace was preparing coffee. Lila sat in the corner with a book, as always trying to be invisible. Lucas watched his son. Watched how Evan's eyes flickered toward Lila, how something about her presence seemed to ease the tightness in his small shoulders. It bothered him. Not because it was wrong, but because it was right. Because this girl could comfort his son when he couldn't. 2 days later, Lucas overheard them again. He was passing the library when he heard Evan's voice, small and hesitant. "Do you think, if I'm good enough, Mom might come back?" "I don't know," Lila said honestly. "But I think you're already good enough. You always were." "Then why did she leave?" "Sometimes people leave because of their own pain, not because of you." Lucas stood outside the door, fists clenched. Who was this child to speak about his family, about his ex-wife, about things she couldn't possibly understand? That evening he called Grace into his office. She entered quietly, hands folded, eyes respectful. "Yes, Mr. Grant. Your daughter." His voice was cold, controlled. "She's been spending time with Evan." "Yes, sir. I hope that's not a problem. She means no harm. I hired you to manage this household, Grace, not to have your daughter involve herself in my son's personal life." Grace's face paled. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Grant. I'll speak to her immediately." "See that you do." He turned back to his laptop, dismissing her. "I don't need anyone interfering in my family's affairs." "Of course, sir." She left, and Lucas tried to focus on his emails, but the words blurred. His chest felt tight. He told himself he was protecting Evan, setting boundaries, maintaining order. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was jealous. Jealous that a 13-year-old girl could reach his son when he couldn't. That night, Grace sat Lila down in their small quarters. Her mother's eyes were red, apologetic. "Sweetheart, Mr. Grant asked that you keep your distance from Evan." Lila's face fell. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby. You didn't. But this isn't our family. We're here to work, not to get involved." "I wasn't trying to get involved. He was just sad, and I didn't want him to be alone." Grace pulled her daughter close. "I know, honey. You have the kindest heart. But sometimes kindness isn't welcome." The next morning, Lila avoided Evan. She kept her eyes down, stayed in the kitchen with her mother, didn't smile. Evan noticed immediately. At breakfast, he looked for her. She wasn't there. At lunch, he saw her walk past the living room without glancing his way. By evening, he found her in the garden, reading alone on a bench. "Did I do something?" Evan asked, standing awkwardly nearby. Lila shook her head, not looking up. "No." "Then why won't you talk to me?" "Your dad doesn't want me to." Evan's face hardened. The softness that had been returning to his eyes vanished, replaced by something colder. "Of course he doesn't." He turned and walked away, and Lila watched him go, her heart aching. Lucas saw the change in his son immediately. Evan stopped coming to breakfast, stopped speaking at all. He moved through the house like a shadow again, but this time there was something darker in his silence. Anger. 3 days later, Lucas found something on his desk. A small wooden box. Inside were 23 torn pieces of a birthday card, carefully arranged, and beneath them, a new card written in Lila's handwriting. "If your dad is too busy, I'll always listen." Your mom wouldn't want you to be alone. Lucas stared at it for a long time. Then he looked out his office window and saw Lila in the garden sitting alone reading. She looked smaller somehow. Sadder. Evan was in his room, door closed, shutting out the world again. And Lucas realized what he'd done. He'd punished kindness, pushed away the one person who'd brought light back into his son's eyes. He'd let his pride, his jealousy, his fear of inadequacy destroy the one connection Evan had found. For the first time in years, Lucas Grant felt the weight of a mistake he couldn't fix with money, only with something far harder: humility. 4 days passed in cold silence. The mansion felt darker, heavier, as if the walls themselves mourned what had been lost. Then Lucas received an email from Evan's school counselor. Subject concerning art project. Please review. He opened it with growing unease. Mr. Grant, Evan submitted a family portrait for our home assignment. While his artistic ability is impressive, I'm concerned about certain elements in the drawing. Could we schedule a call? Attached was a photo of Evan's artwork. Lucas clicked it open. The image filled his screen. It was their mansion rendered in careful colored pencil. In the foreground stood 2 figures. A tall man in a suit face, expressionless hands and pockets. Beside him, a small boy with his head down, colored in shades of gray and blue. Between them, a gap. Empty space. Like a canyon neither could cross. But there was a third figure. A girl in a simple dress, standing in that empty space, her hand reaching toward the boy. She was drawn in warmer colors, yellows, soft oranges, as if she were made of light. Lucas stared at it until his vision blurred. Beneath the drawing in Evan's handwriting, "The person who sees me." His hands trembled as he closed the laptop. That evening, Lucas couldn't focus on work. He left his office early, wandering through the mansion like a ghost in his own home. He found himself standing outside Evan's room again, the same spot where this all began. The door was slightly open. Inside, Evan sat at his desk, working on something. The torn birthday card, now carefully taped back together, lay beside him. He was writing on a new card, his young face concentrated, serious. Lucas watched, barely breathing. Evan finished writing and held up the card, reading it to himself. His lips moved silently, then his eyes filled with tears. But he was smiling. A soft knock came from the hallway. Lila stood there, hesitant, holding a book. "I know I'm not supposed to bother you," she said quietly. "But I found this in the library. It's about constellations. You said once you liked stars." Evan looked at her, then at the book, then back at the card in his hands. "Lila, can I show you something?" She stepped inside carefully, as if the room might shatter. Evan held up the restored birthday card from his mother, now whole again, reinforced with clear tape that caught the lamplight. "I fixed it," he said. "All the pieces you saved. I put them back together." Lila smiled softly. "It's beautiful. But I added something." He showed her the new card he'd been writing. "Look." She read it aloud, her voice catching. "Thank you, Mom, for sending her to me when I needed someone most." Lila's eyes widened. "Evan, you helped me when no one else could, not even my dad." He looked at her with a clarity beyond his years. "I was so angry at him. But then I realized, maybe he's broken too. Maybe he just doesn't know how to fix himself. That's very wise. I learned it from you." Lucas stood frozen in the hallway, his hand pressed against the wall to steady himself. Every word was a hammer blow to the armor he'd built around his heart. His son wasn't just sad. He was insightful, compassionate, strong in ways Lucas had never taught him. Because Lucas had taught him nothing. This girl had. Lila, who had every reason to resent this family, who'd been told to stay away, who'd been treated as invisible, had given his son something priceless. Hope. Understanding. The ability to see beyond his own pain. "Do you think he'll ever talk to me again?" Evan asked quietly. "Really talk, I mean. Not just ask if I did my homework." Lila thought for a moment. "I think he wants to," I think he's just forgotten how. Can people forget how to love? No. They just forget how to show it. Lucas felt something break inside him. Not shatter. Not crack. But break open like earth split by a seed finally pushing through to light. He stepped into the doorway. Both children looked up startled. Evan. Lucas said, his voice rough, unfamiliar, even to himself. I've been listening, and you're right. About everything. Evan stared at his father, uncertain, guarded. Lucas looked at Lila. And you. I owe you an apology. A real one. He stepped closer, and for the first time in months he knelt down. Eye level with both children. I pushed you away because I was ashamed. Because you could comfort my son when I couldn't. Because you showed him kindness I'd forgotten how to give. Lila's eyes filled with tears. You didn't interfere in my family. Lucas continued, his throat tight. You saved it. And I'm sorry I was too blind to see that. Evan stood slowly from his chair. He held up the card he'd written, the one thanking his mother for sending Lila. Dad, he whispered. I think Mom knew. She knew you'd need help. That we'd both need help. Lucas reached out and pulled his son into his arms for the first time in half a year. And Evan didn't pull away. Lucas held his son, and for the first time since Victoria left, he let himself feel everything he'd been burying. The weight of failure. The loneliness. The desperate fear that he'd lost his child forever, not to distance, but to his own emotional cowardice. Evan's small body shook against him, and Lucas realized his son was crying. Not the quiet, hidden sobs from before. Real tears. The kind that needed to be released. I'm sorry, Lucas whispered into his son's hair. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I thought if I kept working, kept moving forward, the pain would go away. But I was just running from you. From us. I thought you didn't love me anymore, Evan choked out. I thought when Mom left, I wasn't enough to make you stay either. Lucas pulled back, holding his son's face in his hands. Look at me. You are everything. You always have been. I was just too broken to show you. Lila stood nearby, tears streaming down her face, trying to slip quietly toward the door. This was their moment. She didn't belong here. Lila, wait. Lucas's voice stopped her. She turned, wiping her eyes quickly. Lucas stood still, holding Evan's hand, and faced this girl who'd done what he couldn't. Don't go. Please. I should give you both space, Mr. Grant. No. He shook his head and his voice cracked. You're part of this. You've been part of this family more than I have these past months. He paused, struggling with words that didn't come naturally. You did something I'd forgotten how to do. You saw my son. Not as someone to fix or manage or assume was fine. You saw his pain and you sat with it. You didn't try to make it disappear. You just stayed. Lila's lips trembled. I just didn't want him to feel alone. I know. Lucas's eyes were red, now glistening. And because of that, he wasn't. Even when his own father abandoned him to his grief. You didn't abandon him, Lila said softly. You were just lost, too. Those words broke something in Lucas that money and power had kept carefully contained. He covered his face with his hand and his shoulders shook. Evan stared at his father, stunned. He'd never seen him cry. Not once. Not even when Mom left. Dad. Evan's voice was small, scared. Lucas lowered his hand, not hiding the tears. I'm okay. I promise. I'm just so grateful for you. Both of you. Evan moved closer to his father again, and this time he reached out his other hand to Lila. She hesitated. Please, Evan whispered. Lila took his hand. The three of them stood there in the soft lamplight of Evan's room, connected by something fragile and new. A family being rebuilt not by blood or obligation, but by the quiet courage of a girl who chose compassion when no one asked her to. A soft sound came from the doorway. Grace stood there, her hand over her mouth, tears running freely down her face. She'd heard everything. Lucas looked at her. Grace, I owe you an apology too. You raised an extraordinary daughter. and instead of thanking you, I tried to silence her gift." Grace shook her head, unable to speak. "I was wrong," Lucas continued. "And I'm asking if you'll both allow it to let things be different from now on. Not employer and employee, not strangers living in the same house, but people who care about each other." Grace found her voice trembling. "Mr. Grant, you don't have to—" "Lucas," he interrupted gently. "Please, just Lucas." She nodded, crying harder now. Evan pulled Lila closer and she stumbled slightly, laughing through her tears. "I've never been part of something like this." "Like what?" Evan asked. "A family that talks. That says what they feel." Lucas knelt again, looking at Lila with something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Pure and overwhelming. "Then let us be your first. Because whether you planned it or not, you're part of ours now." Lila looked at her mother, who nodded through tears. "Okay," Lila whispered. Evan pulled both Lila and his father into a hug, and Grace joined them, and for a moment in that room filled with the soft glow of a single lamp and the weight of tears that healed instead of hurt, 4 people who'd been lost found each other. Outside the window, the stars Evan loved were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Small points of light against the vast darkness, just like Lila had been. One small light brave enough to shine when everything else had gone dark. The changes came slowly at first, like dawn breaking after a long night. Lucas began waking earlier, not for conference calls, but to make breakfast. The first morning he burned the eggs and set off the smoke alarm. Evan laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed through the mansion like music that had been silent for too long. Grace tried to take over, but Lucas waved her off. "I need to learn this. Let me try." By the end of the week, he could make decent scrambled eggs and toast. They ate together at the kitchen table, something they'd never done before. Lucas asked Evan about school. Really asked, and listened to the answers. Lila sat with them now, no longer hovering in corners or trying to be invisible. She told stories about the books she was reading, and Evan hung on every word. Sometimes Grace joined them, and Lucas insisted she sit not serve. "This feels strange," Grace admitted one morning. "Good strange or bad strange?" Lucas asked. She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Good. Very good." 2 weeks later, Lucas came home in the middle of the day carrying a large frame. Evan was doing homework in the living room when his father entered. "I need your help with something," Lucas said. Evan looked up, curious. Lucas unwrapped the frame, revealing the family portrait Evan had drawn. The one with the girl standing in the empty space between father and son. Lucas had it professionally mounted, preserved behind museum-grade glass. "Where should we hang it?" Lucas asked. Evan stared at his artwork, now treated like something precious. You kept it. It's the most honest thing anyone's created in this house in years. It deserves to be seen." Lucas looked at his son. "Where do you think—" Evan pointed to the wall above the fireplace in the living room, the center of the house, where everyone would see it. Together they hung it. When Grace and Lila came in that evening, they stopped staring at the drawing, now displayed with pride. "That's my art," Evan said softly. "Dad says it's honest." Lila stepped closer, studying herself in the picture the girl made of light standing in the gap. "I look braver than I feel." "You are that brave," Lucas said from behind her. "You just don't see it yet." The following Saturday, Lucas did something he'd never done. He cleared his entire schedule. No meetings, no emails, no work. "We're going somewhere," he announced at breakfast. "Where?" Evan asked. "You'll see." He drove them to the planetarium, the one Evan had begged to visit for 2 years. Lucas had always been too busy. Not anymore. They spent 4 hours there. Lucas watched Evan's face light up under the projected stars, listened to him explain constellations to Lila, saw how his son's eyes held wonder again instead of sadness. Grace stood beside Lucas in the darkness of the Star Theater. "He's coming back to himself," she whispered. "Because someone cared enough to sit with him in the dark," Lucas replied. "Your daughter taught me that healing doesn't happen in the light. It happens when someone's willing to sit with you in the shadows." That night, Lucas stood in his office doorway, looking at the desk where he'd spent so many hours hiding from his life. He thought about closing the door, diving back into work. Instead, he walked past it. He found Evan and Lila in the library building a blanket fort, laughing about something. Grace was reading nearby, smiling. "Room for one more?" Lucas asked. Evan's face lit up. "Always, Dad." Lucas crawled into the makeshift fort, his expensive suit getting wrinkled, his carefully styled hair getting messed up by the low blanket ceiling. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Lucas Grant felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not in a boardroom, not closing a deal, but here, with the people who'd taught him what truly mattered. Home. 1 year later. The mansion felt different now. Not just lived in, but loved in. Laughter echoed through hallways that once held only silence. The kitchen smelled of experiments in cooking, some successful, some disastrous, all made together. In the living room above the fireplace, Evan's drawing still hung. But beside it now was something new. A second portrait. Evan and Lila had painted it together. 4 figures this time, standing close, no gaps between them. Lucas was smiling, his hand on Evan's shoulder. Grace stood beside them, her quiet strength visible even in watercolor. And in the center, Lila and Evan holding between them a banner with words they'd written carefully. "Kindness fixes what money never could." Lucas stood before it every morning, remembering the night he'd heard his son cry. The night he'd almost walked away. The night a 13-year-old girl had shown him that healing doesn't require wealth or power. Just presence. Just heart. Just the courage to see someone's pain and not look away. Evan walked up beside his father, taller, now stronger, but still carrying that same gentle spirit Lila had helped him protect. "Do you ever think about how different things would be?" Evan asked, "if Lila hadn't been here?" Lucas put his arm around his son. "Every day. And every day I'm grateful she was. She saved us, didn't she?" "Yes, but not because she had to. Because she chose to. That's what makes it matter." Through the window they could see Lila and Grace in the garden planting flowers together, their laughter drifting inside. Lucas smiled. "You know what I learned from all this?" "What, Dad?" "That sometimes the biggest lessons come from the smallest voices. And that love isn't something you earn or buy. It's something you recognize when someone offers it freely." Evan leaned against his father. "I'm glad we finally listened," he whispered. "So am I, son. So am I." Sometimes healing doesn't come from apologies or grand gestures. It comes from a heart quiet enough to care. What would you do if a child saw what you'd missed? If kindness arrived from the most unexpected place and changed everything? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to Maid's Daughter Stories, where small acts of love create the biggest miracles.